The gun was already in the room before Zariah Cole heard the whisper. She didn't know that yet, but her body did. That cold, specific stillness that settles in the chest when something in the air shifts without explanation. She felt it the moment she stepped through the glass doors of the Haneul Consortium's 38th floor ballroom. Her fingers tightened around the leather portfolio in her hand. Her breathing stayed even. Her face stayed blank. 29 years of living invisible had trained her for exactly this. The art of standing in a room full of dangerous people and looking like she belonged to none of it. The ballroom was the kind of beautiful that costs more than most people will earn in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted the color of midnight blue, their light scattering across marble floors so polished you could see your reflection looking back up at you. Champagne moved through the crowd on silver trays carried by staff in pressed white uniforms. Women in gowns that probably had their own names stood close to men who moved like they had never once been told no. Every smile in that room was a performance. Every handshake was a transaction. Every laugh had been calculated 3 seconds before it left someone's mouth. Zariah moved through it all like smoke. To the 60-something guests filling that ballroom, she was simply the last-minute American translator brought in to assist with Korean and Nigerian investor communications. Quiet, efficient, easy to overlook. She wore a fitted black dress. Professional, not memorable. She kept her locks pinned back. She carried her portfolio like a shield and made eye contact with no one unless spoken to first. This was the role she had accepted. This was the cover she had built. And it had kept her alive through 3 years of working assignments that she had long since stopped calling simple. If you are new here, welcome. This channel is where ordinary people discover extraordinary stories. Stories about power, identity, and what happens when the truth refuses to stay buried. Make sure you subscribe and turn on your notifications, because what happens in the next few chapters of Zariah's story is going to change the way you think about being overlooked. She had arrived at the gala 40 minutes early. Not out of professionalism, out of necessity. She needed to read the room before the room filled. She needed to see how the staff moved, where the security was positioned, which doors were real exits and which ones were only dressed to look like exits. She did this at every assignment. Most translators didn't. Most translators thought their job started when someone handed them a microphone. Zariah had learned early that the real information never lived in the words people chose to say out loud. She was standing near the east side of the room, half turned toward a large floral arrangement that gave her a clean sightline to 3 separate conversation clusters when she felt the shift again. Stronger this time. Something in the architecture of the crowd changed. A path opened that hadn't been there a moment before, not because people physically moved, but because they adjusted. Shoulders turned, backs straightened. Other glasses were lifted for a sip that wasn't really about thirst. It was the specific kind of adjustment that happens when a room full of powerful people acknowledges someone more powerful without wanting to appear like they're acknowledging him at all. Seo Jinhua entered from the north corridor. He was tall in the way that well-built men are tall, not imposing through size alone, but through the completeness of his presence. Black suit, no tie, a single jade pin on his lapel that probably cost more than the chandelier above him. His face was composed in the particular way of someone who had spent years making sure no one could read it. He greeted 3 people within the first 90 seconds of entering the room. Each interaction brief, controlled, and clearly finished on his terms. He didn't linger. He didn't perform. He moved through the ballroom like a man who had already memorized every exit and was simply passing through on his way to something else. He wasn't supposed to look at her. Men like Seo Jinhua did not look at women like Zariah Cole. Not in rooms like this. Not when there were senators' daughters and corporate heiresses 3 feet away wearing dresses designed to be looked at. And yet, as he moved through the far side of the room, something changed in the angle of his gaze. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would have caught. But Zariah caught it, because she was always watching. His eyes moved to her once, then back to the man he was speaking with, then back to her again, not curious, not admiring, recognizing. That was the first thing that felt wrong. She lowered her eyes and adjusted the portfolio in her hand. Blend in. I stay unnoticed. She shifted slightly, putting another cluster of guests between herself and his eyeline. She scanned the room again, checking for patterns, reading body language, cataloging the things that didn't quite fit. And there were things that didn't fit. Small things. The security personnel near the east exit weren't scanning outward the way protective security does. They were scanning inward. Their attention was on the guests, not the doors. That wasn't protection. That was containment. She was still processing that observation when he appeared at her left side, not from across the room, from directly beside her. She hadn't seen him move. That alone told her something about him she hadn't learned yet. He didn't stop walking, didn't turn his head. His shoulder passed within 2 inches of hers and his voice came low, not a whisper designed for secrecy, but the kind of controlled sound that travels exactly as far as the speaker intends it to and no further. She's erasing you tonight. Then he was gone. 3 steps past her and already turning toward another conversation, his expression unchanged, his posture unmoved as though he had said nothing at all. Zariah did not turn around, did not blink differently, did not break the rhythm of her breathing. She stood exactly where she was for 4 full seconds, holding the portfolio, watching the floral arrangement in front of her. Then she started thinking. He had not looked afraid when he said it. He had not looked guilty. He had looked at her the way a man looks at a clock when time is running out, not surprised by what it says, but made urgent by it. Like the warning wasn't new information to him, like it was something he had been carrying for a while and had finally decided to set down. Who was she? Why tonight? And why would Seo Jinhwa, heir to one of the most powerful corporate families in the Pacific Rim, whisper a warning to a translator he had never met before in his life? The security near the east exit shifted. Subtle, coordinated. 2 of them moved 3 feet to the right, not randomly, in direct response to the new guests filtering in from the north corridor. The exits were tightening, and somewhere in this room full of diamonds and lies, someone was already making a list, and Zariah's name was on it. What she didn't know yet was that she wasn't the only one. If you were Zariah right now, would you run? Or would you stay and find out who she is? Drop your answer in the comments. And before we go to Chapter 2, tell me this. What do you think Jinhwa knows that he's not saying? Zariah didn't run. She had learned at 7 years old, in a market in Lagos, that running told people exactly what they needed to know about you, that you had something to lose and you knew it. Her mother had told her that, had pressed it into her the way you press a thumb into soft clay, firm enough to leave a permanent mark. The moment you run, you hand them the power. Stay still, read the room, then move when they're not watching. Her mother had been full of lessons like that. Quiet, precise instructions for surviving spaces that were never designed to include you. Zariah had spent most of her life not fully understanding why her mother felt the need to arm a child with that kind of knowledge. Standing in this ballroom with a dead man's warning still vibrating in her ear canal, she was beginning to understand. She moved toward the bar, not to drink, but because the bar gave her a natural reason to stand still with her back to the wall and her face to the room. She set the portfolio down beside her, ordered sparkling water, let the glass sit untouched in her hand like a prop. She scanned. The guest list for this gala had been presented to her 3 days ago by the coordinating firm that had hired her. 47 names. She had read it once. She had a mind that held things. Numbers, names, faces, patterns, the way other people's minds held music. It was the thing that had gotten her flagged for language work in the first place, the unusual combination of linguistic fluency and pattern recognition that her intake evaluator at the translation firm had described in her file as functionally close to photographic. She had never corrected him. People who underestimate your intelligence do you the enormous favor of revealing themselves completely. so she read the room against the guest list in her head. Table assignments weren't alphabetical. They weren't by company affiliation, which would have been the standard corporate arrangement. They weren't by nationality either, which would have made sense given the international scope of the consortium's investor network. Instead, the clusters were organized by something she couldn't immediately name, a logic that felt structural rather than social. She looked again. 3 guests at the left cluster near the window. A man she recognized as a former South African logistics executive who had been publicly linked to a financing scandal 18 months ago, a woman she had seen in a federal deposition summary tied to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and a mid-40s Korean national whose name appeared once in a 2019 Senate intelligence report and had not appeared anywhere publicly since. Beside them, in the second cluster, 2 men she couldn't immediately place, speaking to a woman whose face she recognized from a photograph she had once seen in a briefing file marked for restricted access. These people did not belong in the same room. Not professionally, not socially. Not unless someone had deliberately constructed a reason to gather them. Zariah lifted the glass of sparkling water to her lips and didn't drink. She had taken this assignment because the money was good and the posting had been low risk on paper. Corporate gala translation, 2 days in Seoul, hotel covered, return flight booked for Sunday morning. She had accepted it the way she accepted most things, with her eyes open and her expectations level. She was not naive about the world the consortium operated in. She had translated for powerful people before. She understood that powerful people had complicated histories and that her job was to carry language, not judgment. But this was different. This wasn't a room full of complicated people attending a legitimate event. This was a room full of people who all shared one specific thing. They each held information that someone, somewhere, needed to keep buried. They were gathered here not as guests. They were gathered here as problems. Her left hand was completely steady as she set the glass back down on the bar. That was the thing about Zariah Cole that most people never got to see. The complete, almost unnatural steadiness that arrived inside her when the stakes became real. Other people described fear as chaos. For her, it worked the opposite way. The more dangerous the situation, the more organized her mind became. As though her body understood that clarity was the only weapon worth carrying. She needed to know who she was. She needed to know why she was in this room. And she needed to understand, before the night moved any further, why exactly how much time she had left before whatever was planned began to happen. She picked up her portfolio and turned from the bar. That's when she saw her. Seated near the far edge of the second tier of tables, dressed in a gown the color of deep charcoal, was a woman who looked at first glance like she belonged completely to this world. Composed, still, unreadable. But there was something about the space around her, the precise, deliberate emptiness, that stopped Zariah cold. No one had sat near her, not within 4 feet. In a ballroom this crowded, that kind of space didn't happen by accident. It happened because people knew on some bone-deep level that they should keep their distance, even if they couldn't have explained why. Zariah knew that feeling. She had studied it. Distance is fear wearing its most polished clothes. She watched the woman for 11 seconds. The woman hadn't moved since Zariah first spotted her, hadn't touched her glass, hadn't looked at anyone around her. She sat with the particular stillness of someone who didn't need to look, because she already knew exactly who was in the room and exactly where each of them was. And then, without any visible cue, without a turn of the head or a shift in posture, the woman's eyes moved, directly to Zariah, across the length of the ballroom, through the crowd, like she had known where Zariah was standing the entire time and had simply decided now to let her know it. Zariah held the stare for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the service corridor. Not because she was afraid, because she had just realized something that made her blood run cold and her mind sharpen into a single, the clean point of focus. The woman hadn't looked at her with recognition the way a stranger looks at someone they've just noticed. She had looked at her the way a hunter looks at something that has finally stopped moving. "Now you know who's in that room," and none of them are innocent. But here's what I need to know from you. Did you catch the detail about the seating arrangements? Because that detail is the key to everything. Comment below. What do you think the consortium is really planning? And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, because Chapter 3 is where everything starts to crack open. The service corridor smelled like cold metal and floor cleaner. Zariah stepped through the side door and let it close behind her without a sound. The noise of the ballroom dropped instantly, not gone, but muffled, like the world behind a thick wall of glass. The corridor was narrow, lit by overhead fluorescents that hummed at a frequency just below what most people noticed. She noticed. She stood still for 3 full seconds, back against the wall beside the door, letting her eyes adjust and her pulse settle into something she could work with. She was thinking about the woman. Han Soryan. That was the name her memory had finally delivered, pulling it up from a briefing document she had read 14 months ago as background context for a financial translation job that had ultimately been canceled. The document had been marked internal use only, and she had been asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement before receiving it. The document itself had contained almost nothing, a half-page of sparse language that carefully avoided saying anything specific while managing to communicate in its very carefulness that the subject was someone whose full profile could not safely exist on paper. The name had appeared twice. The descriptor beside it had read, "Strategic Liaison, Status Unverified." That was all. That kind of incomplete file didn't get created because information was unavailable. It got created because the people who had the information had decided it was safer to leave the page mostly blank. Companies had dissolved when Han Soryan was involved in them. Zariah had heard this in the way you hear certain things in professional circles, not in direct statements, but in the way a conversation stops when a name surfaces, in the way eyes move to the floor, in the careful rerouting of language that happens when someone is trying to say something true without saying anything at all. 3 separate organizations. None of them had failed. Failure leaves evidence, documentation, a paper trail of collapse. These organizations had simply stopped existing. Their employees had moved on, their assets had been absorbed, and the people who had been at the center of them had gone quiet in ways that didn't feel like retirement. Zariah pressed her shoulder blades flat against the wall. If Han Soryan was in that ballroom, not as a named guest, not on the official list she had been handed, but present nonetheless, then the event had a second architecture, one that ran beneath the visible surface of investor dinners and champagne toasts. And if Jinhua had warned her and Soryan had looked at her with that specific quality of attention, then Zariah was not simply a translator who had stumbled into a dangerous evening. She was, for reasons she didn't yet understand, a known quantity. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it made her want to know more. She moved down the corridor, keeping close to the wall, her heels silent on the concrete floor. She had changed into flats in the car on the way here, a habit she had developed years ago that her colleagues found strange and she had never bothered explaining. 3 doors on the left, 2 on the right. Storage, utility, a room labeled communications in English and Korean. The door at the far end of the corridor was ajar, throwing a thin wedge of yellow light across the floor. Voices. She stopped. Not because she was afraid of being heard, but because moving closer required knowing what she was moving closer to. She stood completely still and let the sound come to her. 2 voices. Male. Speaking in Korean, which meant they were not concerned about being overheard by most of the international guests at tonight's event. The first voice was flat, efficient, the voice of someone reading from a mental list. The second was slightly lower, slightly older, responding in single words or short phrases. Confirmation language, the kind of verbal rhythm that happened between people who had rehearsed this exchange or had it so many times the script no longer required elaboration. She caught the phrase, 모든 대상 확인됨, all targets confirmed. Her jaw tightened. Then, 오늘 밤 처리됩니다. 흔적 없이. Handled tonight. No trace. But the second voice said something she almost missed. spoken low, close to the door, as though the speaker had moved. She leaned forward by 2 inches. Uzion sunwi de sangen imi hwagindwesmniga? Has the priority target already been confirmed? A pause that lasted 4 seconds. Kunyonen imi ane ismida. She is already inside. Zariah's back teeth came together slowly. She. Not a name, not a position, just the pronoun, delivered with the flat certainty of a man describing something that was already finished in his mind. Priority target, already inside. She stood in the corridor with the fluorescent lights humming above her and the weight of those words settling into her chest like stones dropping into still water, each one sending out rings that touched everything else she knew about this evening. The seating arrangements, the security facing inward, the uncanny completeness of Han Soryan's stillness, the speed with which Jinhua had delivered his warning and moved away, not because he was indifferent, but because he had timed it. He had calculated exactly how much warning he could give and still maintain his position in whatever this machine was. A purge. This was not a political event or a business dinner with complicated subtext. This was a gathering of selected individuals who each represented a specific kind of problem. And tonight was the night the consortium had chosen to solve all of those problems at the same time, in the same place, with the lights on and the champagne flowing, so that the world outside would only ever see the gala. 47 names on the guest list. She was one of them, and she had not yet figured out why. The voices inside went quiet. A chair shifted. Footsteps, moving toward the door. Zariah pulled back 2 steps, turned and moved, not quickly enough to make sound, not slowly enough to lose time. She put 8 feet between herself and the door in under 3 seconds and turned at a natural angle, facing away, portfolio open in her hands like a woman reviewing notes. The door opened fully. She didn't look back, but she felt the pause, the 2 seconds of attention from whoever had stepped into the corridor, the specific weight of being looked at from behind by someone who was deciding whether to say something. Then the footsteps moved in the opposite direction. Zariah exhaled through her nose and kept her eyes on the portfolio. Her name was on a list, in a building full of people who had no idea what was about to happen to them. And the only person who had warned her was the one man in this entire building she had every reason not to trust. She closed the portfolio. She had to go back into that ballroom, not to escape it, to understand it. 47 names, 47 targets. And Zariah is walking back into the room on purpose. Tell me, is that brave, or is that the most dangerous decision she's ever made? Let me know in the comments. And pay close attention in Chapter 4, because the next person Zariah runs into is going to change everything she thinks she knows about why she is here. She turned the corner back toward the ballroom entrance and walked directly into him. The collision was solid. His shoulder caught hers and the portfolio dropped from her hand, pages fanning across the concrete floor. She bent to collect them at the same moment he did. And for exactly 1 second, they were both crouched low in the narrow corridor, close enough that she could see the grain of the fabric of his suit and the specific quality of tension in his jaw, the kind of tension that wasn't anger. It was something older and harder than anger. Seo Jinhua looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has been thinking about for a long time and has finally run out of ways to avoid. He collected 2 pages and held them toward her without speaking. She took them. Stood. He stood. They were 2 feet apart in a corridor where the nearest ballroom staff was 30 feet away, and the voices from the room around the corner had gone completely silent. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His English was clean, American accented from what she guessed was years of international schooling. The words came out quiet and direct, not a command, closer to a diagnosis. "You warned me," she said. Something moved through his expression and was gone before it had a name. That wasn't a warning to stay and investigate. That was a warning to leave. "Then you should have been more specific." He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that takes a full accounting of someone, that reads their posture and their tone and the way they're standing and cross-references all of it against some internal measure she couldn't see. Whatever he found seemed to either confirm something or complicate it, because the set of his jaw changed slightly. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough." She kept her voice level. "All targets. Tonight. No trace. Priority target already inside." She paused. "Is the priority target me? Or is that a title you're holding for someone else in that ballroom?" His silence lasted 4 seconds. "You speak Korean." "I'm a translator. You hired a translation firm. You should have assumed that was possible." "I assumed you were brought in for the Nigerian delegation, the Yoruba speakers." "I am. I also speak Korean, Mandarin, and French." She tilted her head slightly. "You want to tell me why you warned me, or do we keep standing here until whoever was in that room figures out we're both in this corridor?" Something changed in his posture then, a fractional release, like a door giving slightly under sustained pressure, not open, but acknowledging the push. "Walk with me," he said. He moved toward the far end of the corridor and she followed, not because she trusted him, but because the alternative was going back into the ballroom with less information than she needed and more exposure than she could afford. He stopped near a fire exit door that was closed but not locked. She could see the bar mechanism from where she stood, a usable exit. He had known that before he walked to it. He had chosen this spot deliberately. "The consortium holds these events twice a year," he said. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the corridor behind them, monitoring. Most of the time, they're exactly what they appear to be: investment forums, industry networking. Real business gets done. He paused. But every 18 months, approximately, there's a different kind of event, one where the guest list is curated differently. "Curated how?" she asked. "By exposure level." She held very still. Meaning? Meaning the guests at this particular event are individuals who each have specific knowledge about the consortium's operations that exists outside of controlled documentation. He finally looked at her directly. Knowledge that was never supposed to leave the organization. Knowledge that some of these guests acquired accidentally and others acquired deliberately, and in both cases, the consortium has decided that the liability of that knowledge continuing to exist is no longer acceptable. The corridor felt narrower than it had 3 minutes ago. "You're describing a murder operation," she said flatly. "I'm describing a business decision." The way he said it wasn't casual. It was the specific tone of someone saying a true thing that they have not yet fully accepted as true. "One that my family's organization has made before. One that—" He stopped. His eyes moved to the far end of the corridor. Footsteps, light, deliberate, moving toward them from the direction of the ballroom. He turned back to her. "You need to tell me something right now." "What?" "Your name is on this list." His voice had dropped to a level that required her to be as close as she was to hear him. "You were placed on this list before you arrived in Seoul, before the translation firm contacted you." He searched her face. "Which means someone knew you were coming, and someone knew why." He paused. "The question I need you to answer is, did you?" The footsteps were getting closer. "Did I know why I was coming?" she repeated. "Did you come here for a reason beyond the translation contract?" His eyes were direct, unblinking. "Because if you did, if you are here for the same reason I think you are, then you were sent into this building knowing exactly what it was. And if that's true—" He stopped. The footsteps stopped too. Silence. Then a sound she recognized without needing context, the soft, unmistakable slide of a safety disengaging. Somewhere in this building, the night had moved from preparation into motion. And in the corridor, with the fire exit 2 feet to her right and Jinhwa's question hanging between them unanswered, Zariah heard something else. A muffled sound from the direction of the ballroom that she had never heard in person before, but recognized immediately from every instinct she had spent her life sharpening. A body falling. Someone just fell in that ballroom. The purge has started. And Jinhwa just asked Zariah a question she hasn't answered yet. Did she know what she was walking into? What do you think? Is Zariah exactly what she says she is, or has she been playing a deeper game this whole time? comment below, and stay locked in, because Chapter 5 is where the mask comes off completely. Zariah answered his question by not answering it. That itself was an answer, and Jinhua read it the way a man reads weather, not from what he sees, but from the drop in pressure. His expression didn't change dramatically. The shift was small and precise, like a dial turning a single degree. Something behind his eyes closed, and something else behind his eyes opened. And in the 2 seconds that transition took, Zariah watched him reorganize everything he thought he knew about why she was in this building. "Who sent you?" he said. Not a question. A beginning. "No one sent me." She kept her voice below the ambient sound of the corridor. "I was contracted through the firm. That part is real. But you're not only a translator." "I translate. That's not a lie." She looked at him directly. "The same way you're not only a billionaire's son." That landed. She saw it land. The second muffled sound came from somewhere to their left. Not from the ballroom this time, but from deeper in the building. The east wing. Different floor, possibly. The kind of sound that had a specific weight to it. The kind you felt in the walls. Jinhua moved first, stepping closer to the fire exit and pressing the bar handle down slowly. The door cracked open 2 inches. Cold air entered the corridor. Night air, sharp and real. He held it there, not opening it fully. Just keeping the option live. "I need you to understand something," he said, still watching the door behind them. "This event tonight, my father organized it. Not the consortium board, my father specifically." He said the word father with a flatness that communicated an entire history of things she wasn't in a position to ask about yet. He built the guest list. He chose the venue. He approved the security team. A pause. "I found out about the real purpose of this event 11 days ago." "How?" "Because I was supposed to be managing it." The corridor light flickered once above them, the kind of electrical flutter that happens when a building's power load shifts suddenly. Both of them looked up without meaning to. "What did you do when you found out?" Zariah asked. "I looked at the list." He finally turned back to her, and there was something in his face now that hadn't been there before. Not softness, but something unguarded. The look of a man who had spent 11 days carrying a weight that had no good place to be set down. "I recognized most of the names. People who had worked with the consortium knew too much about specific transactions, had filed protected communications, or held documents the organization needed buried." He met her eyes. "And then I got to your name." Zariah said nothing. "You are not like the others on that list," he said. "The others are there because of what they know, what they've done, what they've seen." He paused. "Your name is there because of who you are." "That doesn't make sense." But even as she said it, something in the base of her stomach moved. A slow, specific heaviness. Like a key turning in a lock she didn't know existed. "Your mother's name was Aday's Cade," he said. The sound of her mother's name in his mouth, in this corridor, stopped something in her chest. "How do you know that name?" "Because it's in the consortium's founding documents." His voice was quiet. Not gentle, precise. The way a surgeon's voice is precise because precision is the only mercy available. "Not as a staff member, not as an investor, as an architect." He let that sit for 1 second. She was one of 5 people who built the structural framework for what the consortium became. The financing mechanisms, the shadow accounts, the legal architecture that made the whole thing invisible to regulatory oversight. Another second. She was also the only one of those 5 people who at some point decided she no longer wanted to be part of what she had helped create. Zariah's back was against the wall without her having moved there intentionally. "My mother was a nurse," she said. The words came out steady. But they came out the way something comes out when the belief behind it has already started to loosen. "Your mother presented herself as a nurse." He held her gaze without apology. "For the same reason you present yourself as only a translator, because invisibility is the safest architecture there is." He paused. "She left the consortium when you were 4 years old. She took documentation, physical files that the consortium has spent 25 years trying to recover, documents that contain the names, account numbers, and transaction records that could dismantle every protected entity they have built. He took a breath. They never found the files. They never found her. And eventually, a door handle turned somewhere close. Both of them went completely still. Footsteps, 3 sets, moving with the specific rhythm of people who had a destination and were not uncertain about it. Jinhua pulled the fire door open fully. Night air flooded in. "Go," he said. "Not yet." She didn't move. "You said they never found the files and they never found her. You said eventually." Her voice was a thread of sound. "Eventually what?" His jaw tightened. The footsteps were 20 feet away and closing. "Eventually," he said, "they found you." The fire door was open. The night was right there, and Zariah Cole stood at the threshold of it with 25 years of her entire life rearranging itself inside her chest. Every memory, every move, every city her mother had taken her to without explaining why. All of it shifting into a shape she had never seen coming. The footsteps rounded the corner. She saw them before they saw her. 3 men in staff uniforms, the kind that didn't carry trays, the kind that carried something heavier in the inside pocket. The nearest one's eyes landed on her in the same instant she registered his hand moving. Jinhua stepped between them. "Mr. Seo," the nearest man began. "I'm aware of the timeline," Jinhua said, his voice completely controlled, his Korean clean and authoritative. "She's with me. Stand down." A pause. 3 seconds that felt like falling. The man looked at Jinhua, then at Zariah, then back. "Your father," he started. "I said stand down." The silence that followed was the specific kind that happens when a decision is being made by someone who doesn't have enough authority to make it confidently. The man's hand stayed where it was, not raised, but not still either. And Zariah understood in that moment, with total clarity, that Jinhua's protection was real and temporary, and held together by nothing more durable than his name. When his father found out he had intervened, that name would stop being a shield. It would become a target. Jinhua just put himself between Zariah and his father's men. And now Zariah knows the truth about her mother. But here's what's still buried. What are those documents her mother took? And where are they now? Because I promise you, the answer to that question is going to flip this entire story on its head. Comment below. Do you think Zariah already knows more than she's letting on? And if you've been watching from the beginning, you already know. The biggest reveal hasn't happened yet. The man with his hand inside his jacket did not move. Neither did Jinhua. The 3 seconds between them stretched into something that had no clean name. Not standoff, not negotiation, but the specific suspended moment when 2 forces are measuring each other and neither one has fully committed to what happens next. Zariah stood 2 feet behind Jinhua's left shoulder and used every one of those seconds to read the 3 men in front of her. The one in the center was the decision-maker. His eyes were the steadiest, his breathing the most controlled. The 2 flanking him were waiting for his signal. Their hands were still. Their weight was shifted forward. These were not security staff. These were finishers. The center man looked past Jinhua's shoulder at Zariah with the specific quality of attention that told her he had been briefed on her face before tonight. He knew exactly who she was. He had been looking for her. Jinhua said something low and even in Korean that she caught only pieces of: his father's name, a timeline reference, the word postpone. The authority in his voice was real, but the center man's eyes moved to his phone, a half-second glance, just enough to check something, and whatever he saw there changed the calculation behind his expression. He took 1 step back, then another. He said in English, with the flat delivery of someone leaving a door open rather than closing it. 30 minutes, Mr. Seo. Then all 3 of them turned and walked back the way they had come. Unhurried, their footsteps precise on the concrete floor until the sound of them was gone. Jinhua turned to face her. The control in his expression had not cracked, but it had thinned. She could see the effort underneath it now. The way you can see the steel frame of a building through the glass when the light hits at the right angle. 30 minutes means nothing, she said. You know that. I know that. He looked at her steadily. But it was what I had. She absorbed that. He had spent whatever currency his name carried in this building to buy her 30 minutes, and he had done it knowing the cost would come due before the night was over. She was not the kind of woman who treated that lightly, but she also was not in a position to spend time on it right now. My mother, she said. Tell me the rest. He was quiet for a moment, but not reluctant, gathering. The way someone gathers themselves before they say something that they know will permanently alter the landscape between two people. Your mother's name inside the consortium was not Daugh Cade, he said. That was the identity she built when she left. Her operational name, the name she worked under for 11 years, was Amara Solis. He watched Zariah's face. She was not a minor participant. She was the person who designed the consortium's entire system of concealed asset movement, the mechanism that allowed billions of dollars to move across 12 countries without appearing in any regulatory record. He paused. She was, by every internal measure the consortium had, their most valuable architect. Zariah's throat was dry. That is, she kept her expression neutral because it was the only thing she could currently control. You said she took documents. Physical files. Not digital. She was too careful for digital. Printed records, handwritten transaction maps, original authorization signatures from the founding board. His jaw shifted. Documents that, if they were ever presented to the right authorities, would result in the complete dismantling of every financial structure the consortium has built over 30 years. He looked at her. Documents that have never been found. Because she hid them. Because she hid them. He nodded once. The consortium spent years looking. They searched every property connected to her known identity. They tracked every movement she made in the 3 years before she disappeared completely. He stopped. They found nothing. Zariah was quiet. The fluorescent light above them hummed. How did I end up on the list? She asked. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. Because 8 weeks ago, a financial analyst working for the consortium's audit division ran a deep pattern search on all individuals with documented ties to Daugh Cade. He held her gaze. Your name surfaced, your work history, your language profile, and one other thing. A pause that had weight. A transaction record from 16 years ago, a small educational trust set up in your name by a third-party legal firm in Amsterdam. The same legal firm your mother used for 3 of her concealment structures. Zariah felt something shift in the floor beneath her. Not physically, but in the way that certainty feels when it starts to move. She set up a trust for me, she said slowly. She set up a trust for you. He looked at her carefully, reading her the way she had been reading everyone else all evening. The consortium's analysts believe the trust was not just financial. They believe it was structural. That your mother embedded something inside the legal architecture of that trust, a key, a location, a code that connects directly to wherever those documents are hidden. The corridor was very quiet. They think I'm carrying the location of the files, Zariah said. They think you are the location of the files. He paused. Or rather, they think you hold a piece of information that you may not even know you have. Something your mother gave you or told you, yes, or built into your life in a way that would only make sense when the right context arrived to decode it. 25 years of her life. Every city, every move, every careful, quiet instruction her mother had pressed into her like a thumb into soft clay. Stay still, read the room, then move when they're not watching. Zariah closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, something had changed in her face. Not dramatically, but Jinhua saw it, because he was watching closely enough to catch it. The shift from someone processing information into someone beginning to use it. The trust documents, she said. Who is the registered legal contact? He blinked. Why? Because I've seen that name before. Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. I just didn't know what I was looking at. The fire door was still open behind her. The night air was cold and real, and the world outside it was full of options that didn't include this corridor, this building, this man, and the 30 minutes his name had purchased. She didn't move toward it. Instead, she looked at Jinhua with the clear, specific focus of a woman who had just stopped being confused and started being dangerous. I need access to the consortium's internal records for the last 25 years, she said. He stared at her. I know where the documents are, she said. I think I've always known. I just didn't have the question yet. A sound reached them from the direction of the ballroom. Not a crash, not a scream. Something quieter and more final. The sound of something ending that had been carefully planned to end. The 30 minutes had just become 20. Zariah just said she knows where the documents are, and she said she's always known. She just didn't have the question yet. What do you think her mother hid inside her? Comment below right now, because the answer to that is the key to everything. If this story is hitting different for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every comment, every share keeps these stories alive. Chapter 7 is coming, and the woman who has been watching from across the room all night is finally going to speak. Chapter 7. She was standing in the ballroom doorway when they returned. Han Soryeon. Not waiting, not watching. Standing with the complete, unhurried stillness of a woman who had already made every decision available to her and was simply allowing events to arrive at the conclusion she had prepared for. She had moved from her seat near the back of the room to the precise threshold between the ballroom and the corridor, which meant she had known where they were, and she had positioned herself at the only route back. The ballroom behind her was different now. 4 of the original 60-something guests were gone. Not excused, gone. Their chairs sat at vacant angles. Their glasses were still on the table, one of them tipped sideways in a way that no one at a gala ever tips a glass on purpose. The remaining guests were performing normalcy with increasing effort. Conversations that moved too fast, eye contact held too long in one direction because looking in the other direction meant seeing the empty chairs and registering what they meant. The staff moved differently too. Tighter, more coordinated, fewer of them carrying trays. Zariah clocked all of it in the 3 seconds it took her to close the distance between the corridor entrance and the point where Soryeon was standing. Jinhua came to a stop 2 feet behind her left shoulder. Soryeon looked at Zariah the way she had looked at her from across the ballroom earlier, directly, without performance, without the social scaffolding most people wrap around their attention when they're in a public space. But it was different now at close range. Up close, Zariah could see the specific texture of Han Soryeon's attention. It was not predatory, exactly. It was evaluative. The look of someone running a final verification on something they had already largely confirmed. "You're faster than I expected," Soryeon said. Though her English was precise and unaccented in any single direction. The English of someone who had learned it from multiple sources and had long since smoothed out the geography. "You expected me to run," Zariah said. "Most people run." A pause. "The ones who don't are usually the ones who understand on some level that running would be the wrong choice." Her gaze moved briefly to Jinhua and returned to Zariah without emotion. "He told you about your mother." It wasn't a question. "Enough," Zariah said. "He told you the version he knows." Soryeon's voice didn't change in tone or temperature, which is accurate as far as it goes, but there are things about a day's Cade that are not in the consortium's records, because she was careful enough to keep them out. She looked at Zariah steadily. "Things that I know. Well, because unlike the consortium's analysts, I did not look for your mother in documents." A breath. "I looked for her in people." Somewhere in the ballroom, a woman laughed, a social laugh, obligatory, slightly too high, and the sound of it hit the air like something dropped from a window. "You knew her," Zariah said. "We worked together for 4 years." Soryeon's expression did not soften, but it changed in a way that was harder to name, like the shift in a room when the temperature drops 1 degree. "Before I understood what the consortium truly was. before either of us fully understood what we had built and what it would cost. She paused. Your mother was the most precise mind I have ever been in a room with. She could see structural consequences 6 moves ahead. She could identify the exact point at which a financial architecture would become a liability before anyone else had reached the calculation. A beat. She was also the only person I have ever known who walked away from something she had built from the ground up and never once looked back. She looked back, Zariah said quietly. Sorian regarded her. What makes you say that? Because she spent the rest of her life making sure I was ready for exactly this conversation. Zariah held her gaze. That's not someone who walked away. That's someone who planned a return. For the first time since Zariah had entered this building, something shifted in Han Sorian's expression that was not calculation. It was brief, a small, specific thing that moved through her eyes and was gone. But it was real. She planned you, Sorian said. That's exactly the right word for it. Another pause. The trust in Amsterdam was the final piece of a structure she built across 7 years and 4 countries. Every element of it was designed to deliver one thing to one person at one specific moment. Her eyes didn't move from Zariah's face. The documents your mother took from the consortium are not hidden in a physical location. They are not buried or vaulted or locked behind a key that exists in the material world. Zariah waited. They are encoded, Sorian said, in a system your mother designed herself, a layered cryptographic structure built into the trust's legal language that reads as standard legal text to anyone without the specific decoding sequence. She paused. A sequence that your mother embedded in your education. The floor didn't move. But everything standing on it did. My language training, Zariah said. Your language training, Sorian confirmed. Every language you were taught, in the specific sequence you were taught it, using the specific curricula your mother selected, each one was a layer. Korean first, then Yoruba, then Mandarin, then French. Not because those were the most practical languages for a child in your circumstances, but because the first letters of each foundational text she had you study, read in sequence using the phonetic mapping system she built. She stopped. You are the key, Zariah. Not metaphorically, literally. Your mind holds the decoding sequence. It has held it since you were 11 years old. You simply have never been given the lock. Jinhua had gone completely still behind her. 3 of the remaining ballroom guests stood up from their tables simultaneously, not naturally, not with the rhythm of people deciding to leave, but with the coordinated movement of people who had received a signal. The consortium's board is in this building, Sorian said, her voice dropping without losing its precision. Not in the ballroom, in the private conference suite on the 40th floor. They have been watching this event on a closed feed. She met Zariah's eyes. They know you are still here. They know Jinhua intervened, and they have just overridden his 30-minute window. A door opened at the far end of the ballroom. 4 men entered who were not guests and were not staff. We have approximately 4 minutes, Sorian said, before this conversation becomes a different kind of conversation entirely. She looked at Zariah with the directness of someone offering a thing they have held for a long time. I left the consortium 7 years ago. I have been building a case against them since the day I walked out. What I have been missing, the only thing I have been missing, is the decoded sequence from your mother's documents. Her voice was steady. I am not your enemy, Zariah. I was your mother's. A pause. And she trusted me with one final thing before she disappeared. The 4 men at the far end of the ballroom were moving now, navigating through tables, unhurried but direct. What did she trust you with? Zariah asked. A message, Sorian said. For you. For the night you finally stopped running and started asking the right questions. 2 minutes. Sorian just said she has a message from Zariah's mother. A message that was held for the exact night Zariah stopped running. What do you think that message says? Drop your answer in the comments, because I want to see who gets close. If this story is moving you, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life a story like this might reach. Chapter 8 is coming. And the message changes everything. Chapter 8. The four men were 60 feet away and closing when Soryan reached into the interior fold of her gown and produced a small, sealed envelope. Cream-colored. No larger than a business card. Sealed with a strip of plain wax that had no stamp or marking on it. The paper had aged slightly at the corners. Not old enough to be fragile. Sunny, but old enough to have been held and re-held and carried for years by someone who had never been certain the right moment would arrive. She held it out. Zariah took it. The paper was thicker than standard envelope stock, the kind of paper someone chooses deliberately, for durability rather than appearance. She felt the slight raised texture of handwriting through the back of the envelope, and her chest did something she didn't give it permission to do. A single, sharp contraction that she absorbed and moved past in under a second. "Don't open it here," Soryan said. 50 feet. There is a car parked on the street level of the Sejongdairo exit. Black Genesis. The driver's name is Kwame. Your mother chose him. He has been waiting for 2 years. She was already moving, angling slightly to the left in a direction that would intersect the path of the approaching men, while leaving the route behind her clear. The car will take you to a secure location where you can access a terminal connected to the trust documents. When you open that envelope, you will understand what to do next. You're going toward them, Zariah said. Yes. Why? Soryan paused for exactly 1 second and looked back over her shoulder. Because your mother built you an exit. Someone has to hold the door. Then she walked directly toward the 4 men with the composure of someone who had been in harder rooms than this and had never once needed anyone to clear the path for her. Jinhwa was at Zariah's left shoulder. She could feel the decision forming in him, the question of whether he moved with her or stayed, and what each of those choices cost. She didn't give him time to finish deciding. "Come or don't," she said, and she moved. The service corridor to the left of the ballroom's east wall connected to the building's utility stairwell. She had identified this route 40 minutes ago when she first walked the floor. 3 flights down to the parking level, left turn past the mechanical room, emergency exit to the street. She had memorized it the way she memorized everything. Once, completely, without revisiting it. Jinhwa came. They moved fast and quiet down the corridor. No running. Running creates sound and draws attention in ways that controlled, rapid walking does not. She counted the doors as she passed them, confirmed the stairwell entrance, pushed through it. The metal door swung and she caught it before it could slam. The stairwell was concrete and echo, every sound amplified and directional. She listened for 3 seconds before committing to the descent. Nothing above. A faint mechanical hum from below. Normal building sound. They went down. "The 42nd floor," Jinhwa said as they moved. His voice was low, controlled. "That's where my father is." "I know. If he's watching the building feeds, he already knows we left the corridor." She didn't slow down. Knowing and intercepting are 2 different problems. Right now we have about 90 seconds between knowing and intercepting. 2nd floor landing. She checked her watch. 8 minutes had passed since the 30-minute window began. 22 minutes left on a clock that had already been overridden, which meant the timeline was no longer 30 minutes. It was however long it took the 4 men who had been redirected by Soryan to determine they had been redirected and radio the lower floors. She estimated 4 minutes. Parking level. The door opened into a low-ceilinged concrete space, smelling of exhaust and cold stone. Rows of vehicles in structured lines. Motion sensor lighting that clicked on in sections as they moved through it. Unavoidable, but not immediately dangerous. She scanned for the exit ramp. Found it. Moved toward it. Zariah. Jinhwa's voice stopped her. Not urgently, but with a specific quality that made her turn. He was standing 3 feet behind her, and something in his posture had shifted in a way she hadn't seen from him before tonight. The control was still there, but it was carrying something additional, something personal, unguarded. The kind of thing that comes to the surface in a person when they have passed the point of careful management and arrived somewhere more honest. "When this is over," he said, "what you find in those documents..." He stopped. Reformulated. My family's name is in those records. My father's signature is on things that cannot be undone." His jaw was tight. "I need you to understand that I know that. I need you to understand that I am not asking you to protect him." She looked at him for a full 3 seconds. "I know," she said. "You don't have a reason to believe that." "No," she said. "But you put yourself between me and 3 men carrying weapons in a corridor where no one would have seen anything. And you spent whatever your name is worth in that building to buy me time." She held his gaze. That's not the behavior of a man protecting his father's interests." She paused. "That's the behavior of a man who has decided which side of something he's on." Something in his expression released, not dramatically, not with relief exactly, but with the specific quality of something that has been held under tension for a long time and has finally been allowed to stop. "The envelope," he said. She was already opening it. The paper inside was folded once. The handwriting was small, dense, and precise, her mother's handwriting. She knew it the way she knew her own reflection. The ink had faded at the edges to a warm brown, but the center strokes were still dark and definitive. Her mother had pressed hard when she wrote. She always had. She read it. Once, then again. The parking structure was quiet around them. 2 floors above, a building full of people in expensive clothes were drinking champagne over the bodies of decisions that had already been made. 4 men had been redirected by a woman in charcoal gray who was either holding them off or had already been taken by them, and there was no way to know which from here. Zariah folded the letter. She held it against her palm for 2 seconds. "What does it say?" Jinhua asked. She looked up at him. "It says the documents aren't encoded in my language training," she said. He frowned. "But Sorian said—" "Sorian was told what my mother needed her to believe." Her voice was steady and quiet and absolutely certain. "The decoding sequence isn't in my education." She paused. "It's in the trust documents themselves, hidden in plain language. And the trust documents are held by a legal firm in Amsterdam whose senior partner—" She stopped. Jinhua watched her face change. "Is still alive," she finished. "Who is it?" She looked at him. "It's you," she said. The word landed in the concrete space between them and did not echo. It simply stayed. "The trust was established in your name," she said. "Not your father's. Yours. You were 11 years old when it was filed. Your mother—" She stopped again, recalibrated. "Our mothers knew each other, Jinhua. They built this together. And they built us into it." She held up the letter. "You have been holding half of this your entire life and you didn't know it, and I have been holding the other half." A breath. "Which means the consortium has been trying to eliminate both of us, not just me." The motion sensor light above them clicked off. So in the dark, the sound of the stairwell door opening on the floor above was very, very clear. Jinhua is the other half. He has been carrying part of this since he was 11 years old and never knew it. Their mothers built this together. And now, the consortium knows both of them are still in the building. What does that mean for what happens next? Tell me in the comments. And if you feel this story in your chest, share it. Send it to someone. Stories like this are meant to travel. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications, because Chapter 9 is where everything Zariah has carried her entire life finally becomes a weapon. Chapter 9. The stairwell door above them opened and held open. Someone was listening before descending, which meant they were trained, and they were careful, and they were not making the mistake of assuming the parking level was empty. Zariah was already moving. Not toward the exit ramp. The ramp was the expected route, which meant it was the compromised route. She moved left, deeper into the parking structure, toward the maintenance corridor she had clocked when they first entered. A narrow door set flush with the concrete wall, painted the same gray as the surrounding surface. She had noticed it because it had no handle on the exterior, just a keypad, and the keypad had a green indicator light, which meant it was currently unlocked. Maintenance access. Someone had propped it open earlier and hadn't reset the lock. She pressed the door open and they went through. The maintenance corridor was narrow and low. Exposed pipes running along the ceiling, a concrete channel along one wall carrying electrical conduit. The smell was cold metal and dust, and the specific dryness of a space that existed to be functional rather than occupied. It ran the length of the parking level and connected, she calculated, to the building's loading dock on the south side, which would exit onto a different street than the Sejongdaero entrance where Kwame was waiting. She stopped. "We can't split up," Jinhwa said behind her, reading her pause correctly. "I know." She was thinking fast. The letter was still in her hand. Her mother's handwriting. 11 words on one side that she had read twice and already held completely in her memory. She would never need to read it again. The information was already part of her. As everything her mother had ever given her was already part of her, which was exactly the point. She had spent 29 years thinking her mother had built her into someone who could survive. She was understanding now, in this cold corridor with footsteps beginning on the stairwell above, that her mother had built her into something more specific than that. Her mother had built her into a conclusion. "The trust documents," she said, keeping her voice below the ambient mechanical sound of the building. "When were you first made aware of them?" Jinhwa was close behind her, monitoring the door they had come through. 3 years ago, a legal firm in Amsterdam contacted my private counsel, said there was a document filed in my name from a firm they had absorbed, dated from when I was a child. They forwarded a copy. He paused. It read like standard trust language, financial provisions, educational stipulations, nothing that flagged. I filed it and didn't follow up. "Do you still have the copy?" "In my personal archive, encrypted." A pause. "Why?" "Because the decoding sequence my mother embedded is in the trust language," she said. "But it requires 2 reads, one from the document as written and one from the document as received. The received copy will have marginalia." She turned to face him fully in the dim corridor. "Not handwritten, structural, formatting variations that read as printing errors to anyone looking at them casually. Slightly inconsistent line spacing in 6 specific paragraphs. A period used where a comma should be 4 times in 4 separate clauses." Her voice was steady and fast and precise. "Those markers, read in sequence against the phonetic table my mother built into the Yoruba curriculum she gave me when I was 9, produce a 40-character string." She held his gaze. "That string unlocks the primary document set." He was very still. "You've known this," he said. Not accusatory, awed. "I've known pieces of it my whole life," she said. "I didn't know they were pieces. I thought she was just thorough, particular about my education. She would spend hours on specific texts, specific passages, specific phonetic exercises, and she would say—" Her voice tightened for exactly 1 second. She let it pass. She would say, "Some things are worth knowing precisely because no one expects you to know them. I thought she meant language fluency. I thought she meant professional advantage." She exhaled. She meant this. The door at the end of the maintenance corridor, the loading dock access, had light under it. External light. Street level. "There's something else in the letter," Zariah said. Jinhwa waited. "My mother knew she was running out of time when she wrote it," she said. "She wrote it 6 weeks before she disappeared. Not from the consortium. She had already left them. She disappeared from me." She looked at him carefully. "She didn't leave because she was afraid for herself. The letter makes that clear." A breath. "She left because someone inside the consortium had learned that she had a daughter, and as long as she was visible, as long as there was any thread connecting her to me, I was findable." She paused. "So she removed the thread. She made herself the only target. And she went somewhere they could follow her indefinitely, and never arrive anywhere useful." Another pause. "She's alive, Jinhwa." The word alive moved through the corridor like a frequency. "She's been alive this entire time," Zariah said. "The disappearance was constructed, a controlled exit, and the letter—" She stopped, pressed her lips together once. "The letter has coordinates, embedded in the punctuation of the last paragraph using the same phonetic mapping system." She looked at him. "She built me a way to find her. She just needed me to get here first." He looked at her for a long moment. "The 40-character string," he said. "You need my copy of the trust document to complete it." "Yes. Which means we need to get out of this building," he said. "Yes. Together." "Yes." He nodded once. No hesitation. No performance of consideration, just the clean movement of a decision that had already been made by the time it needed to be spoken. She turned back to the loading dock door and stopped. Because the light under the door had changed. A shadow had crossed it, one moving shape that had stopped directly on the other side. Someone was standing outside that door, and they had stopped there deliberately, which meant they were not delivery staff or building maintenance. They had stopped there because they were waiting, because they knew about this corridor, because the route she had chosen, the one she had identified as the uncompromised option, had already been anticipated. Her right hand moved to the door frame. She pressed her back flat against the wall beside it. Jinhua mirrored her on the opposite side without being told. The shadow under the door didn't move. 3 seconds, 4, then a knock, single, low, deliberate. Not the knock of someone demanding entry, the knock of someone identifying themselves. Zariah looked at Jinhua across the narrow corridor. He shook his head slightly. He didn't know who it was. She looked at the door. Another knock, same pattern. Then a voice, low, male, coming through the steel of the door with the muffled quality of distance. One word. Kwame. The driver her mother chose has been waiting 2 years for this exact night. He found the door she was supposed to walk out of, and now Zariah is 20 feet from the street. With the letter, with Jinhua, with the 40-character string half-formed in her mind. Is this the way out, or is this the moment the trap closes completely? This is the question that will keep you up tonight. Leave your answer in the comments. Share this story. Someone in your circle needs to hear it. And subscribe right now and turn on your notifications, because Chapter 10 is the ending that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Chapter 10. Zariah opened the door. Kwame was broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, with the kind of face that had been through things and had not been made smaller by them. He wore a plain dark jacket, and he was standing with his back partially to the door, monitoring the street behind him while he waited, which told her his training was real and his patience was the practiced kind. He looked at her when the door opened with the same directness that her mother had looked at everything, straight at the thing, no flinch, no softening. "You look like her," he said. Not the moment for that. She knew that, but it landed in her chest the way certain true things do, clean and hard and permanent. "Car?" she said. 20 meters. Moving in 40 seconds. He looked past her at Jinhua and registered him without visible reaction. "Both of you." They moved. The street outside was cold and wide and ordinary in the way that streets in the early hours are ordinary. A few cabs, distant traffic, the far-off rhythm of a city that didn't know what was happening on the 38th floor of the building behind them. Kwame moved ahead at a steady pace, not hurrying, not performing calm, just moving with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this specific sequence enough times that his body carried it without effort. The car was where he said it was. Black Genesis. Engine already running, rear windows tinted dark. Zariah got in first. Jinhua followed. Kwame pulled into traffic before the door was fully closed, and within 90 seconds the building was behind them, and Seoul's nighttime streets were flowing past the windows in streaks of light and motion. No one spoke for 30 seconds. Then Jinhua said, "Where are we going?" "Secure location," Kwame said, without taking his eyes off the road. 30 minutes out. No digital signature. Your mother set it up 4 years ago, he added, directing this at Zariah. "I've been maintaining it." 4 years. Her mother had built a safe house 4 years ago for a night she believed would eventually come, had chosen a driver, had maintained the infrastructure, had held it in readiness against the possibility that her daughter would someday arrive at the exact correct moment with the exact correct questions. Zariah sat with the letter in her hands in the back seat of a moving car in a city she had been brought to under false cover, with a man she had met 3 hours ago who was carrying half of a decoding sequence in his personal archive without knowing it. And she felt, for the first time in this entire night, something that was not calculation or urgency or the controlled management of fear. She felt the specific and overwhelming weight of being known. Her mother had known her, had known who she would become and how she would move and what she would do when she was finally in a room with the right information. Had built a structure around her daughter's entire life that was designed to deliver her here, intact, capable, holding everything she needed, at exactly the right moment. That was love, not the soft kind, not the easy kind, the kind that costs everything and makes no announcement about the cost. "I need to ask you something," she said to Kwame. "Yes." Did she know I would come tonight? Specifically tonight? A pause. The car moved through an intersection, Soul's lights running across the windshield. "She knew you would come when you were ready," Kwame said. "She said you would know when that was, even if you didn't know you knew." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Tonight you stopped running." She held that. Then she turned to Jinhwa. "I need access to your archive," she said. "Oh, I know." He had his phone in his hand, already pulling up the encrypted partition. "The copy of the trust document is in here. I'll need 30 seconds to pull it." While he worked, she closed her eyes, not to rest, to read. The phonetic table her mother had built into the Yoruba curriculum existed in her memory with the same completeness as every other thing she had been given. She moved through it from the beginning, the foundational texts, the specific passages her mother had made her repeat until the sounds were inside her like music. She had always assumed the repetition was about fluency. Now she understood that the repetition was about encoding. Her mother had been writing something into her, layer by layer, year by year. Now with the patience of someone who understood that the most secure place to hide anything is inside a person who doesn't yet know they're carrying it. "I have it," Jinhwa said. She opened her eyes. He held the phone toward her. The trust document filled the screen. Dense legal language, standard formatting. She read it the way her mother had taught her to read, not for meaning but for pattern. She moved through it once fast, then once slow. Line spacing in paragraphs 2, 7, 11, 14, 23, and 28, slightly compressed. Imperceptible unless you were looking. Period where comma should be. Clause 4, Clause 9, Clause 19, Clause 31. 6 structural markers, 4 punctuation markers, 10 reference points total. She ran them against the phonetic table in her memory. The 40-character string assembled itself with the specific certainty of a lock clicking open. She didn't say it out loud. She looked at the window. Outside, Soul moved past in the dark, ordinary and enormous and completely unaware of what was sitting in the back seat of a black car moving through its streets. Unaware that a woman had spent 25 years becoming a key. Unaware that 2 mothers had quietly built a structure inside the machinery of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Pacific Rim. A structure designed to bring that organization down from the inside, using nothing more than language and time and the specific, unbreakable faith that a daughter would one day ask the right questions. "Zariah," Jinhwa's voice, quiet. She turned. "When we get to the terminal," he said. "And you use the sequence? What happens?" "The documents surface," she said. "Everything my mother documented. 30 years of transaction records, authorization signatures, account structures, names." She held his gaze. "Including your father's." He held hers back. "I know." "It dismantles everything." "I know. There's no version of this where it doesn't." "I know," he said for the 3rd time, with the quiet finality of someone who had made a decision that could not be unmade. "I made my choice in that corridor. I'm not revisiting it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. The safe house was 25 minutes away. The sequence was complete in her memory. Somewhere in Amsterdam, my illegal archive was waiting for a 40-character string that had been traveling toward it inside one woman's mind for 25 years. And somewhere, in a location encoded in the last paragraph of a letter written 6 weeks before a disappearance that was not a disappearance, a woman who had once called herself a dayscade was waiting for a phone to ring. Zariah pressed her back against the seat. She thought about what Kwame had said. "Tonight you stopped running." She looked at her reflection in the dark window, her face overlaid on the moving city behind it, present and transparent at the same time, real and reflected simultaneously. She thought about every city, every lesson, every careful, quiet instruction pressed into her like a thumb into soft clay. She thought about a woman who had given up the visible parts of her life, the presence, the proximity, the daily weight of being someone's mother, to protect a structure that was always, in the end, about one thing. Not revenge, not power, not the documents or the sequence, or the 40 characters that were now sitting in her memory like a loaded question waiting for an answer. The whole structure, the languages, the trust, the safe house, the driver, the letter, had been built around one real and simple thing, the belief that her daughter would be enough. Zariah Cade looked at her reflection and did not look away. She had been enough. She had always been enough. The car moved through the dark and the city moved around it and somewhere behind them. In a building full of people making decisions based on the assumption that a woman named Zariah was running. The assumption was already wrong. She wasn't running. She never had been. She had been arriving. And she was almost there. That's the end of chapter 10. But this is not the end of Zariah's story. The sequence is in her memory. The terminal is waiting. Her mother is waiting. And everything the consortium spent 30 years building is about to meet the one thing it was never designed to survive. A daughter who was built to finish what her mother started. If this story moved you, if it hit something real in your chest, share it right now. Send it to someone who needs to be reminded that being overlooked is not the same as being powerless. Leave a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in this story that changed everything for you? Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. Every story we tell here is built to remind you that the people history forgets are often the ones who change it. Don't miss what comes next.